It was a hot day on September the 1st, 1862, and the roads dusty when the Texas Brigade began their march into Maryland. They'd spent the previous day burying their dead from the Battle of Second Manassas, and were now on the journey that General Lee hoped would end the war.
Sharpsburg, or the Battle of Antietam, was fought on September 16th and 17th, 1862. Robert E. Lee wanted to invade the North. Him and President Jefferson Davis wanted to have a quick peace. Robert E. Lee said, well, let me invade Maryland and see if that would demoralize enough Union forces for them to surrender. He really thought the population of Maryland would be behind them a lot more than they were. He made it a point when Robert E. Lee had his Army of Northern Virginia go through villages and towns to play Maryland, My Maryland, which is the same tune of Oh Christmas Tree. He really thought the population would be behind the Army of Northern Virginia. A little were, but a lot weren't. And he didn't know that. He didn't suspect that. And it was a shock.
The Texas Brigade was on the move, but without the command of their general, John Bell Hood. During the fighting at Second Manassas, the brigade had captured several Union ambulances, which Hood divided among his regiments where they were badly needed. Brigadier General Nathaniel Evans, technically senior to Hood, ordered the ambulances turned over to his South Carolina brigade. Hood refused, and when Lee found out, had him arrested. So he was not at the head of his division when they moved into Maryland, but instead followed them at the rear. As the brigade was forced to make a retrograde march back from Hagerstown to Boonesboro, Maryland to reinforce D.H. Hill's troops who were coming under Union attack, Robert E. Lee sat on his horse Traveler watching the procession. As the men passed Lee, they shouted out, "Give us Hood!" To which Lee doffed his hat and replied, "You shall have him, gentlemen." After meeting with Hood, who was following at the rear, Lee suspended his arrest and he rejoined his troops. They would soon be fighting in the bloody battle at Sharpsburg.
Some of the troops are there on September 16th. Some see action, but some weren't. The 1st Texas Infantry was at South Mountain, and that's not too far away from Harper's Ferry. They're part of Stonewall Jackson's famous foot cavalry, and so they arrive in the morning of September 17th. And finally, they're able to have a breakfast, make biscuits and bacon, because they were surviving off of green corn and green apples for days. So finally, they had the chance on September 17th to cook bacon, get the cooks to make biscuits, and enjoy a good, hearty breakfast. Just as soon as they start cooking their bacon, they hear explosions, cannon fire, and they know they have to go into battle.
On the morning of September 17th, Lee doesn't really fully understand it or know what's going on, but he's in a bad situation. His back is up against the Potomac River. His enemy, George McClellan, has come up from the peninsula and faces him with a force that's at least 2.5 times larger than Lee's and much better equipped and ready for a fight. And third, McClellan is at that lucky stroke of having found the orders that tell him where every piece of Lee's army is. The sort of thing every 19th century commander dreamed of. So Lee is pinned, he's outnumbered, and his enemy knows where his pieces are, what his plan is. So when the Union attacks begin that morning, Lee is in the position then of an outpunched, outweighed fighter, just simply up against the ropes fighting for survival. That's the situation when he turns to Hood's brigade and says, look, I've got a gap. In the cornfield, I need y'all to go in there and hold the position. And that's what Lee's will tell Hood's brigade to do, is to go into that cornfield and hold the position. It's not really a charge so much as just keep the Union Army, this would be up on the left flank of Lee's army, from wrapping around Lee's much smaller force and overwhelming it.
We're at the Sharpsburg-Antietam National Battleground, and behind me stands the Texas Monument, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Hood's Texas Brigade. On the morning of the 17th of September, 1862, Amidst the thundering cannons and billowing smoke, these brave Texans charged headlong into the inferno of Miller's cornfield, right here on this very soil. With unwavering resolve, they fought for the freedom and ideals they held dear. This monument stands as a tribute to their courage, a beacon of remembrance for generations to come.
And so they go in, and in the first 20 minutes, we guesstimate that there were 2,000 casualties. Then 20 minutes, every leaf of that cornfield is gone. The first, fourth, and fifth are there, but the first takes the brunt of it. And we have those remarkable stories that can be backed up with evidence. We talk about a unit losing its coherence when it gets to 15 or 20% losses. The 1st Texas stood in that cornfield, took 82% losses, fired every round they had in their pockets, and stood there yelling cuss words, throwing rocks with fixed bayonets, and daring the Union troops, who outnumbered them about 6-1, to come one more time.
Sergeant Howard E. Perry, part of the Marshal Guards of the 1st Texas from Corsicana, Texas, was one of the casualties, and there's a photo of him, black and white photo of him, probably taken either in Austin or in Richmond at the beginning of the war with a big Texas Bowie knife. And this is a young man, and he had 5 brothers, 5 Perry brothers. 3 of them never survived the war. Howard did not survive the Battle of Sharpsburg, which is very tragic. A lot of young men were in the Texas Brigade. People think of soldiers as being a little older. A lot of them are boys. A lot of them are boys. George A. Bernard of the 1st Texas was the flag bearer. He marched many miles in bare feet. His feet were bloody and scraped up. His commanding officer, Major Matt Dale, says, "Sergeant Bernard, let me see your feet." And so he shows him his bare feet. He says, "You're not going to battle. Your feet are too bloody. You're too sore. Go to the hospital." That saved George Bernard's life.
The 1st won its spurs, won its battle honors in the cornfield at Antietam. The 4th at Gaines Mill, the 5th at 2nd Manassas, the 1st in the cornfield. But they paid 82% in casualties, and they lost their flag. The Union officer who picked up that flag, which was laying on the ground, counted 11 dead Confederates who had died trying to defend and support that flag before he was able to reach it and just pick it up off the ground. It's an overwhelming story. It's a story of what shouldn't have happened, but somehow the Texans made it happen. They shouldn't have held that cornfield, but they did. They shouldn't have been able to repulse 3 different Union corps, but they did. And we historians, we can dissect it, and we'll talk about this is McClellan's fault. He's not a fighter who fights to win. He fights not to lose. So he wouldn't send all of his troops at the same time. They came in sequence, so the Confederates are able to shift and fight them off. But the bottom line is that they did fight them off against incredible odds. And not as many of them as you might think came back out of that cornfield. When we show these pictures many a time of veterans after the war who've lost a leg, who've lost a foot, a lot of times the punchline is at Antietam in the cornfield for Hood's Texas Brigade.
George Bernard made it absolutely the correct summary. He said the flag was not exactly captured. During the Civil War, if a Union soldier captures a Confederate flag, they get the Medal of Honor. Thomas Custer, George Armstrong Custer's brother, had 2 Medal of Honors because he captured 2 Confederate flags. Well, the soldier from Pennsylvania found the battle flag of the 1st Texas Infantry, and he got the Medal of Honor. The 1st Texas flag was given back to Texas in 1905 with the great exchange of flags. The U.S. government gave back their battle flags of the South to the southern states. Not only was the 1st Texas Lone Star battle flag captured, so was their Army of Northern Virginia battle flag. Both flags are now stored at the Texas State Archives in Austin. But if it wasn't for George Bernard's bloody feet, you'd never known about his exploits at Gettysburg. and later other battles, because he would have been dead.
We're standing in front of the old Dunker Church. At nightfall on the 17th, the brigade moved back to the church to rest and reorganize. Later that evening, General Lee summoned his commanders to get their assessment of the day's battle. When he got to John Bell Hood, he asked, "Great God, General Hood, where is the splendid division you had this morning?" Hood answered, "They're lying on the field where you sent them, sir. My division has been almost wiped out." Joseph B. Pauley of the 4th Texas later wrote, "The Battle of Sharpsburg was fought with desperate courage by both the gray and the blue. And the 17th of September, 1862, stands out as the bloodiest day in American history. More men were killed and wounded that day than on any other day of the war. And I doubt if the dead and wounded ever lay thicker up on any field than was seen from the old Dunker Church." I hope you enjoyed this episode of Hood's Texas Brigade. And if you did, be sure and give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.